My name is Stephanie Doubet, and we're gathered at the Williamsfield, Illinois American Legion on January 12, 2025 to interview Lee and Connie Wight. It's my honor to represent the Spoon River chapter of the Illinois DAR today. The Vietnam Veteran Video Project is an ongoing initiative to honor our local Vietnam veterans, remember their sacrifices and those of their families through video interviews. I'd like to welcome Connie and Lee Wight and thank you both for agreeing to share your memories with me and with audiences for generations to come. Lee, I first want to share your military service details to get oriented with the time and place and your military role during the Vietnam War. I learned that you enlisted in the Army in 1968. Your dates of service were from 1968 to 1971. I learned that you were in the 1st Air Cavalry Division Air Mobile, and you achieved the rank of Chief Warrant Officer 2. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can you share how it came to be that you selected the Army branch of the military?
Yes, that's strange. To preempt, I started skydiving before I went into before I quit college or during college, and then I quit in the second year. After the second year, and started to work at CAT, and this was the Vietnam situation was escalating at this particular time, so I figured I was a prime candidate to be selected or to be drafted, and I didn't want to be drafted. I wanted to select what I wanted to do, and because I was so interested in aviation, the skydiving routine, I got my pilot's license in 6 weeks to fly skydivers, and I was actively teaching and flying skydivers at that time. And then the lady at the draft office, which I became friends with, I always like to be friends with people, and she called me up and she says, "You're not too terribly far away from being drafted." I said, okay. So I went down to the United States Post Office in Galesburg in the basement, and they had the Marines, the Air Force, the Army, all the branches were down there. And I interviewed with all 4 of the branches at that time. And Air Force didn't want me because I didn't have a 4-year degree. And the Marines also, and the Navy, you just didn't have a 4-year degree to fly. I wanted to fly. But the Army, I've come to find out later, I found out he got a bonus for signing me because at that particular moment, and he discussed that with me, that they were killing 33% of the aviation pilots in Vietnam, and in 68 was Tet, and this was 68. So that was the high impact time. And I didn't want to crawl through Vietnam, I wanted to fly. And he says, well, we'll sign you up. So that's the way I got into Army aviation.
How old were you when you began skydiving?
I was 19.
Okay, so were you about 19 or 20 at this time that we're talking about?
I was 20 when I went in, and I had my 21st birthday, and I was in the Phase 1 type down in Texas.
Okay.
And I was flying helicopters down there. We flew 60 hours there and another 60, and then we flew another 260s in Rucker, Alabama. So that gave us 220 hours of flying time, which is commercial. You can get your commercial license, which I did. I got my commercial instrument and rotary, thinking I'd make a career out of it after Vietnam, but I just didn't want to do that. And we'd been separated long enough, and so.
But it did come in handy as a hobby, didn't it?
It started out, skydiving was a hobby, and then it became a passion. And actually, we'd broke up for a few months during our college time. She was only 20 miles away from me, and I was over to her college, and she walked down the stairs, and I I said, Connie. She goes, Lee. And so she walked over to me, which I thought she was mad at me because she said I wasn't being nice. But anyway, so she walked over and I asked her if she was dating anybody, and she said no. And I said, well, I'm not either. And she says, well, you're here to pick up a date. I said, no, it's a long story, but I said, no, I'm not interested in her at all. And so anyway, I took her back to the airport the next weekend with me, and then we went up in the airplane, and I told my pilot, Mike, I asked him, I said, now, this is my old girlfriend, and I said I went with her for a long time in high school and part of college, and I said, I really like her. So I said, when you get up to 7,500 feet and I jump out, I said, turn the plane upside down and spin all the way down the ground, because she loves aerobatics. And Mike said, no problem, I'll do that for you. And so I jumped my student at 25, we go on up 7,500, and I backed out to the door. And I loosened up her seatbelt, and I got her over so she could see me fall out of the airplane. And I reached up and grabbed her in the shirt and pulled her forward, and I kissed her. And out the door I went, backwards. And I'm falling, and I'm watching her, and she's got her mouth wide open, like, ah. And then I flipped over and started doing and then I look, as I'm doing my series, I look over and Mike's got the airplane upside down and he's spinning down, and she actually beat me down. Yeah, so that's the way we got together. 4 months later, we were married.
Well, and that is a good segue to ask you about your earlier days, the chapter before you enlisted in the Army. I wanted to ask how each of you would describe your childhoods and your life leading up to your dating life, just to get to know you briefly before Lee's story of being enlisted and service time. And Connie, would you mind sharing?
I had basically a boring life. I was an only child because my brother was 14 years older than I and had gone into the Army, and I barely remember him. And we never went on vacations. We never did anything. So when Lee and I started going together, his family was very social, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
So you lived a pretty quiet life in a little town of, at the time, Williamsfield was it still about a 600 population community?
I think it was 500, yeah.
Okay.
Very small.
Okay. And you lived in Williamsfield most of your childhood, didn't you?
Most of it, yeah.
Okay.
We moved around several times, but
And how would you describe your childhood growing up in Williamsfield?
Boring. It was, I invented things to do, and I was so bored. If I'd have known her back when I was 6 years old, we'd have had a lot of fun together, because she was bored, and I didn't even know she was alive, but anyway. I would lay on the front yard of my grandma's house and watch the crows fly. And I wanted to be a crow. And then my superhero was Superman. But to be able to jump off a tall building and, fly would be just was a passion. Used to shoot arrows and try and catch them when they came down, just crazy stuff. Just anything for excitement. I used to hunt a lot, and I didn't pick and choose a whole lot what I shot, and it probably could have gotten arrested today, but back then they didn't care. It was just boring. So we both had boring childhoods.
Your nature, though, and what you were interested in as a little boy was well aligned with where you ended up.
Oh gosh, yeah. I scratched an itch that needed to be taken care of.
How did the two of you first meet? When did you first notice each other? When were you on each other's radar?
That was the dance. Okay, it was, she was just graduating from 8th grade, and I was just going into sophomore year. I was a year ahead of her in school. And I got all dressed up. It was up in the old Legion Hall, as a matter of fact, same where we're having, but it was uptown in the old one. And walked in there, and I think Ray Zarville was running it, wasn't he?
Might have been.
It might have been him. Anyway, they used to have, I think they called them Tempotine dances up there. And so I walked in the front doors, and I looked over to the left, and there were 3 chairs sitting there. And one of them was Cassie Doubet today. She was Cassie Sauter then. And then the other one on the other side was Donna Ray Mackey. And Donna's Greg's wife, good friend of mine, and her too. She was my cousin now. And I looked at that middle one, and her name, I said, man, it's Connie Wight, or Way, I think. And I said, wow, she's cute. And I looked at Cassie, and she's awfully quiet. You know, I looked at Donna, and she's my cousin. And so I just walked right over to Connie and asked her to dance. We danced all night and been dancing ever since.
And then that was the beginning of you dating all through high school, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you remember having a gradual awareness that the draft would be coming soon?
Oh,
and for someone of a younger generation, what kind of warning did you have? Was this a 12-month rumor that this would be coming, or how much time did you have to wrap your mind around the idea that you were either going to be drafted or you had to enlist soon?
Just a minute, I quit college, because that was, you see, you had a deferment through college, and I hated college. I really didn't care for it. And but the skydiving I liked, and so I knew I liked aviation. But I went back to work at CAT when I quit. And of course, that's when Connie and I got married. But I knew it was coming. So, like I say, I went down to the draft board and talked to him.
And something that I have always wondered is, in that time that you knew it was coming, is that, and you're a 20-year-old man, you're very young, did you find it to be very stressful and emotional, knowing what you had to sign up to do, or did you have a very positive feeling about it?
I made it positive. It was stressful. Yeah, there's no question.
Yeah.
The entire country was in stress over
Yes.
Vietnam. It was not a pleasant situation. And I wouldn't have volunteered if they hadn't been the draft. But with the draft, I did not want to be drafted. So I picked what I wanted to do, and I got to do it.
Do you remember if your parents talked with you much about
My
enlisting?
dad was in World War II, and he drove trucks through the European theater, and deuce and a halves, I think they called them. And he was positive about the military. I got to hear his war stories when I was growing up, and just wanted to have my own war stories. So I didn't mind going in. I was kind of upset for Connie because I knew she wasn't going to be a timid little girl back then, and that was going to be rough on her. But there wasn't a whole lot we could do. I mean, it wasn't.
Well, one of my questions also was for Connie. I wondered if you remember your feelings at the time about Lee enlisting, and did you two have talks about what this meant for your relationship? And
Well, yeah, we did talk a lot about it, but we knew that there wasn't anything we could do, and we had to make the best of it. And we decided, my parents lived in the area, but Lee's parents did too, and I stayed with them. So there was more activity there, and not that I didn't go see my parents all the time, but we just knew that there wasn't an alternative to it.
And then it was a nice distraction to stay with his family.
Yes.
And then at some point, you got married,
Mm-hmm.
and before he went to boot camp, correct?
Right.
And then you also found out some good news, I think, shortly before he left or during his time. I feel like you had news of your first pregnancy.
Not yet. No, we
Okay.
really hadn't planned that. We decided that I would go meet him in the summer after my second year of college was over, and his parents drove me down and left the car there, and they flew back so we would have a car. And I remember packing up what I thought I needed, and one of those things was an ironing board, which I would never take today. But we met, and I stayed on a ranch with an older lady who was 75. I thought that was old. And she lived out in the boonies, and there were lots of rattlesnakes and scorpions. And then I moved into town into a trailer that was pretty much trashed up, but gave me a chance to clean. And I had a really good friend whose husband was also in the training, and we, kept each other company because we couldn't see each other except for 1 hour on each night a week. Couldn't hold hands, couldn't, it was all very formal. And it was there that we saw a lot of kids, Army kids, babies, and so we decided to start a family then. So it wasn't until we were at Fort Rucker that we found out we were expecting a baby. So
Okay, so I got ahead of myself. So if we back up to the beginning of the experience would be boot camp, I would guess. And where was boot camp for you?
Fort Polk, Louisiana.
And what memories do you have
That's
of that?
the armpit of the world. It doesn't get any worse than Fort Polk, Louisiana. It was very similar to Vietnam as far as hot, muggy bugs and just filthy. And then they had a place called Tigerland down there. That was I think it was the last 4 weeks of your 3 months of training down there. You would go to Tigerland, and Tigerland you'd live out in the mess and the boonies and eat bugs and snakes. And it was just, they taught you how to survive. I didn't think I really needed that. I'm going to be a pilot. I'm not going to be crawling through the jungle, but understand if you get shot down, you may have to crawl through the jungle. So I just went ahead and went along with the training, but it was miserable. Don't know I've ever had anything so miserable in my life. Even Vietnam was a cakewalk compared to Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Wow, I did not realize how terrible boot camp was.
I didn't like
I
it.
knew it wasn't enjoyable, but do you think they chose that location, purposefully because it matched Vietnam conditions so well?
Yeah, that was the main reason they put all the pilots through there, or I would say 90% of them. And then Walters was the primary in Texas, or Mineral Wells, Texas. Fort Welders is what they called it. And then that was 120 hours of flying time, and then you go back to Rucker, Alabama, and we lived in Dothan there, and that's another 120. So he had over 200 hours of flying time.
Did you feel by the end of all of the training well prepared to be sent to Vietnam?
I didn't have a clue. I didn't know. I could fly a helicopter. I wasn't worried about that, but there's a lot more to it than just flying a helicopter. And I'm not a gung-ho military guy. I wasn't waving flags, and I wasn't against it either. I just wanted to fly. I didn't care what I did. I just wanted to fly. So.
Did your Fort Rucker training prepare you for flying under life-threatening conditions?
Oh yeah. They taught us formation flight. They taught us. They didn't teach me what I actually wound up doing, which is common in college or anything. Any type of education, you wind up getting first-hand experience when you're at the first hand. And but yeah, that was where they finished you off. They taught you instruments and how to fly, and that saved my life one time, flying instruments, several times actually. But one time I was lost out over the South China Sea and out of gas and had a full load of people, and I was running out of options, and it was at night. It was a bad deal. But anyway, I got on instruments and finally got on a GCA and nailed the runway perfect. And it was just because of my experience in Fort Rucker. Saved my life.
And in that story, I don't think I've ever heard that story that you just mentioned. What leads you to that point where you're almost out of gas and you're not where you need to be? What circumstances lead to that?
I was lost, okay. I took off out of Saigon or Benoit, I don't remember which one it was, and I was flying north, and that fog just hit. I wasn't really prepared for it. I mean, you're supposed to be prepared for it, but I didn't have my knee. We have these plates that we put on our knee, which has the instrument flight numbers and everything, the radio frequencies, and I didn't have that with me. And I don't know whether if I forgot it or what happened, but anyway, and the guy flying right seat was probably the dumbest pilot I ever met, and I had no help there. And so I finally, I mean, it takes time to get acclimated that you're in IFR conditions, so I would say maybe 10 minutes I was totally IFR. I couldn't see anything, and so I was trying to fly and do the radios, and this guy was freaking out, my pilot. And so I was trying to get the right frequencies, and I finally got on the right frequency. By the time I'd done this, I had turned and was moving east towards the South China Sea. And by the time he finally got recognized, he found me on the scope. I was on the very edge. I came real close to being outside of his radar. Back then, they just didn't have really state-of-the-art equipment to work with, but he found me, and he says, "Sir," he said, "I think you're over the South China Sea." And I said, "That's where I was afraid I was at." So he had me fly 270, and I flew back and flew into Phuc Vinh, landed.
And one of my questions was going to be, where were you located during Vietnam? And you just
Phuc Vinh,
mentioned,
yeah.
say that again.
Phuc Vinh, Phoucvinh.
Okay.
Phuc Vinh. The Vietnamese pronounce it a little different. We use it for a cuss word, but everybody was saying it over there that way, and I'm going, what?
What? What were your initial impressions of Phuc Vinh and Vietnam?
It was dirty. Little kids running around naked. I don't know. It's a very primitive country. The further you went north and got into outside or country people, they really didn't wear any clothes. That was a shock, cultural shock for me. Little kids would run up to the helicopter, and then you had to quit doing that because you had to keep them away from the helicopter because they would put hand grenades in their. If they would wear a diaper, you're better off they didn't have anything on. But if they had a diaper on, you had to be really careful because they'd stick a hand grenade in there and blow up your helicopter. That was going on. Just crazy stuff like that.
So I'm just going to restate that so that I'm sure I understand. Adults would put a grenade in a baby's diaper and send the child towards your U.S.
Of course, we would give them things, and they would always have something to sell. These little kids, probably 3, 4 years old, 2, 3, 4 years old, and they'd have some, something they carved, and you could buy it for next to nothing. You would visit with them, and of course, you didn't speak their language, but kids are kids, Mm-hmm. But then all of a sudden, they started blowing helicopters up, and so they told us, don't let them come up the helicopter.
To be leery of little children.
Yeah,
yes.
Then that just became standard operating procedure. You couldn't let anybody come up to the helicopter, no matter who they were.
So meanwhile, during flight training, helicopter training, Connie, you were still stationed at the ranch?
Yes, I was.
Until what point? At what point did you move back to Williamsfield?
When I woke up one morning and there was a scorpion on my pillow. And I thought maybe if I moved into town, I loved the lady I lived with. It was quite an experience. But I found a trailer in town, and that was not a really nice trailer, but it was an experience. And that was kind of my attitude, was it's not going to last forever, so just clean it up and go.
And then at what point, when Lee was sent to Phuc Vinh, did you move back to Williamsfield at that point?
Yes, he had a certain furlough, days off before he left.
Couple weeks.
I moved into his parents, and then he went to Chicago. I took him up to O'Hare. We stayed overnight at a hotel near there. And I left him, and he took a flight to Seattle. And I wouldn't do that today. Of course, it's a lot more busy than it was then. But I remember one of the cab drivers saw me and asked me if I was okay. And I said, no. But so I drove back home, and I was at his parents.
So from Chicago, you drove yourself back home,
Mm-hmm.
and you're saying you wouldn't do that today?
I wouldn't drive at O'Hare, no.
Right. So you were the only family member that officially saw Lee off.
Mm-hmm.
And was that an upsetting goodbye? Had you prepared yourself?
She was pregnant.
Yes.
Yeah.
How pregnant were you at that point?
About 4 months.
Okay. And then you returned home to Williamsfield
Mm-hmm.
to stay with the Whites.
Mm-hmm.
And then this began the habitual letter writing.
Yes.
And how many letters did you exchange for the next 3 years?
They're in three boxes
2 more
over
years, I would
there.
say.
Yeah, I wrote every day. He wrote almost every day, unless he...
Sometimes I couldn't write. I was just either dead tired or didn't have the opportunity. So
And how many days would you say that it took your letters to get to each other?
2, 3 maybe sometimes.
Yeah, a week maybe, but
Which sounds
almost
fast.
faster than today.
Yeah, I got her letters quicker than I think she got mine. But yeah, I have. We kept all her letters.
Do you want to talk any more about Fort Rucker, or do you want me to move on?
We just enjoyed.
Not that much happened there.
We just enjoyed living together. That was
Yeah, in a trailer every
such a blessing.
night.
Yes.
And
Got you through that first year, really. Part of that first year, right?
but Rucker, that was where I flew instruments and tactical flying formation. We got to actually live like a couple then. That was
Yes.
that was 5 months there.
Yeah.
And then
Did you know to appreciate that at the time? Did you think this is great? We're getting to live together. This
Yeah.
is going to last forever.
the first time.
Well, and you guys don't remember John and Joe Potter. They used to have Central Butane, and then he went back to school to become a lawyer. They've since passed away, but Lee and I both worked for him in high school.
Okay.
And they came down to visit us, and just to show you what, we were probably not very nice. Our bedroom had a double bed, and the other bedroom had bunk beds.
Yes.
We didn't give up our bed for them. They had to sleep in the bunk
Bunk
beds.
beds. They were fine. They survived. I've slept in bunk beds too as adults. Lee, I learned that you have been awarded the Bronze Star Medal, National Defense Medal, Army Aviator Badge, Vietnam Service Medal, Vietnam Campaign Medal with Device 60, an Air Medal, and the Vietnam Cross of Gallantry with Palm 2 Overseas Bars. Did I leave out any of your medals or service awards?
They had all the paperwork done for a Purple Heart, and I turned it down.
Can you explain
I
the
just
Purple
saw
Heart
some
story?
horrific, tore up people over there, and it was a cut on my foot. It was what they call I don't know. They got a name for that, but I mean I was crawling out of my bedroom into the bunker because we got rocketed that night, and it blew away my roommate's bed. But on the way out the door, I cut my foot, and so I didn't think anything about it. It got infected, so I went to the infirmary, and that's the way I got turned in for Purple Heart. But I turned it down.
You declined the Purple
I
Heart.
declined it, and I wished I hadn't now. But
And I'm just your audience member, but it seems like your life could have been taken in that explosion. Would you agree?
Had it been about 20 feet further, it would have been right in our bedroom.
Which makes me feel like the Purple Heart was deserved.
There's a couple of instances over in Vietnam where I still thought it was fun.
Yeah.
I turned things around, and I try to make stuff fun. And of course, being able to fly a helicopter was my just
It's
really,
your jam. Yes.
really, really happy to do.
You mentioned, when you mentioned the Purple Heart, you said that you had seen and witnessed people who were hurt really badly in Vietnam.
I hauled some people, firsthand. I mean, I was right there with them. And but the one that sticks in my mind, I still dream about it. He was lighting it wasn't a combat thing. He was lighting a heater, and the heater blew up on him, and it burned from his waist up, just burned him terribly bad. And I flew him down to medevac there in Long Binh and dropped him off. He was unconscious, and everybody freaked out about it because it wasn't a rocket that came in. It was just an accident, and he died just a couple of days later. He didn't make it, but we had to wash the helicopter. It was so bad, the skin and the blood and everything. It just, that one sticks in my mind.
Yeah. I wondered if some of the injuries that you witnessed were difficult to mentally cope with around the days that they happened, and then
you get kind of calloused after a while. Somebody gets shot and they throw them in the back end. You haul them to medevac. Well, that's just a job. It's like ambulance drivers. They pick up bad accidents all the time. You don't get involved with it. Now the guys in the back that were handling those fellas, some of those guys felt the trauma more than the pilots did. But your stomach's always tied in knots anytime you're in a situation like that, and it's called stress. And it just, but you learn to deal with it.
Do you think the job you had to do as a pilot was a nice distraction at all from what was going on in the back?
Well, I made it fun. No matter what I did, I had to make, and of course, if you like your job, it's going to be a whole lot more to do your job. And I had a passion. I loved my job. I love flying, and I did a lot of bizarre stuff over there that probably shouldn't have. And my major was always proud of the different events that I did over there with the helicopter. And so he tried to, he gave me a promotion to commissioned officer, but I turned it down because if I'd have been a second lieutenant then, and you can do that in country, and he was begging me to do it because he needed some people to do management in a warrant officer. You just fly. You don't have to. That's all I wanted to do. And I explained to him, I said, I don't really want to be a commissioned officer because he'd have to extend in the military, and we were in it for the short term, and as soon as we got back, I was supposed to be in for 6 years, and we wound up getting out in 3, because by the time 68 and 69, and in late 69, the deaths, the helicopter pilot death rate happened to start to be on a decline. And so when I got back and taught for that 1 year in Walters, Texas, by the end of that year, they had too many helicopter pilots. It just bang like that. It just turned from they couldn't find them fast enough to they had a surplus. And so the guy walked in and asked if anybody wanted out. And he says, well, yeah, I raised my hand. I said, I knew I would have stayed in, but I knew, and we're partnership big time. And I knew she didn't want it. She'd have slapped me in the next week if I would have gone ahead and said, or not taken it.
And while you were away in Buc Bin, did you share a lot of these stories of war with Connie in letters? Did you keep her
letters,
up?
yeah.
I wondered if you kept her updated, or if you shielded her, or did you share a lot of your experiences?
I didn't tell her the graphic things. No, I'm not going to do that because that would freak her out. I censored a lot of it, but I told her if we lost somebody or something like that, I wouldn't get graphic about it, though.
But you kept her updated.
I didn't tell her about getting lost out of the South China Sea or flipping side. I think I did tell you about going sideways through the palm trees. That was a bad deal.
You sent audio recordings when you were getting incoming.
Yeah.
But I knew it was okay if you sent it back, so.
We have audio. We have audio the night that I was supposed to get the Purple Heart, but it was a terrible explosion, and but it was just from here to just outside the front door of the Legion here.
Yes.
That's how close it was.
Well, I wondered if of all the medals the medals and service awards that I listed, is there one that you're most proud of or that's most special to you?
Well, the Bronze Star was kind of a pat on the back. The Air Medals I deserved. No, not really. They all meant something.
Is there a story that you could tell us that was most eventful or special or even life-saving that you experienced?
Well, life-saving. The flying through the palm trees sideways.
Can you tell that story?
I had picked up 3 NBC reporters. Now, here again, this is just horseplay. I wasn't supposed to be doing this. But I had picked up 3 NBC reporters. They were brand new in country down in Saigon, Hotel 3 they called it. And I came around the end of the runway on 09 coming into Tan Son Nhut. And you have to be in a corridor between 500 feet and 700 feet over Saigon. And then when you get underneath, then you have to go underneath the takeoff and departure path. So I kicked it out of trim, fell sideways for 500 feet, just straight down, sideways. And I leveled out and was flying low level. And I had a guy sitting behind me, a white-headed kid, and he was a lieutenant. And then the 3 NBC reporters were sitting in front of the transmission. And before I left, this major comes up and grabs me by the shirt and pulled my helmet out so that I could talk to him. And he said, "Hey, Mr. White," he said, "give these newfers," that's a new person in country. It has a kind of a slang to it, but anyway, they call them newfers. He said, "Give these newfers a ride they'll never forget." And I gave him a thumbs up. So I'm thinking about what I can do. And there were a pair of palm trees about 5 miles north of Saigon. And I'm bebopping through the rice paddies and just skimming the rice paddies. And I come up to those palm trees and they go up like this. And they're they were about 20, maybe 25 feet wide down to bottom, and then they'd branch out to like 75 feet. Well, that helicopter out in front there, it's 50 feet long. The rotors are 50 feet and 48, and it's 10 feet tall. And I came up like this, and it was a high ambient temperature day that day. It was really hot and muggy, and the air was thin. It had just really gotten to that point. It was like 10 or 11, probably 11 o'clock in the day. And I came back on a cyclic to go up over the palm trees, and nothing happened. I'm still going 80, 85 miles an hour that way, knots. And nothing. It came up, and it was just not doing the climb like it was supposed to. And so I could see down through the bottom of the windshield, and I could see I was going to hit the palm trees. So I kicked in what you call left pedal to right cyclic, and I turned it. And once again, I'm going 80 knots this way, and I turned it sideways and went through the palm trees sideways, and then came back and tried to get it to fly again. And it wasn't. It was coming down towards the rice paddy, and just a last second before I hit the water, would have hit the water, it started to fly. So we get back, and I got turned in for court-martial. The guy sitting next to me was our operations officer. He was scared to fly anyway, and I put him through that nightmare. So my major came over to me that night, knocked on my door in my hooch, which never, ever happened. And he said, "Mr. White," he said, "we need to go to the officers club and talk." And I said, "Yes, sir." So I put on my outfit and down to the officers club we went. And he looked at me and he said, "You need to buy me a Jack and Coke." I said, "Okay." So I ordered a Jack and Coke and I got a beer and I said, "What's going on?" And we had some chit chat. I talked about Connie and he talked about his wife. We really got to know each other well. And he finally looked at me and he said, "Just what in the hell did you do to my lieutenant today?" And so I explained it to him. I didn't stutter or anything. I said, "Well, this Major told me to give him a ride they'd never forget," and flipped the helicopter sideways through the palm trees. And I said, "It was not a good situation, but I did it." And he says, "I don't know how you did it." And I said, "I don't either. But it did. It worked." And he said, "Don't do it again." I said, "Okay, that's not a problem." We shook hands. And he tore up the court-martial. So, yeah.
Well, I was wondering, when he came and knocked on your door, if you were already stewing and nervous about what had happened that day, or had you moved past it in your mind and thought it would be okay?
No, dumber than a box of rocks. I didn't know didn't know the lieutenant had gone that far. I knew he almost couldn't walk when he got out of the helicopter because I saw him. But I didn't think anything about it. It's just another day flying. But he didn't like to fly, and that's the reason he was he worked in the office. He didn't want anything to do with helicopters, scared death of them. And I kind of knew it, but I kind of didn't. And I shouldn't have. If I'd have thought about him sitting there, but I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about these NBC reporters. And one of them, I found out years later, his name was Richard Threlkeld, and he was a famous war correspondent in Vietnam. So at least I kept him alive that day.
Yes. It's such a, I'm conflicted when I listen to the story because on one hand, you took a risk, but on another hand, you gave them a great ride and you also got them home safely. So I feel like you deserve more credit than criticism. No?
No, that Major Smith and especially that Lieutenant Hollingsworth, I think was his name.
They would disagree with me.
I still think he has probably a nervous disorder. I'm sure he's getting a disability of some kind over that. But
that had to be stressful for you too. And when you got home and landed, are you able to just compartmentalize those experiences and move on with your day without any?
No repercussion whatsoever. No,
What a gift.
Just another day in Vietnam. But this guy had a meltdown, so I got in trouble over his meltdown. If he'd have just shut his mouth and not said anything, it would have been fine. But
did you feel like this was one of your most memorable experiences?
No.
That was just one of them.
That's just a crescendo because I wound up running into the guy that was sitting right behind me. I don't know, 30 years later. His name's Tom Martin. Tom Martin lives in Princeville, Illinois. And he and I are on a river boat down in Peoria. And he's drunk. He's got a cigarette in his hand and he walks up to me and I had my Huey hat on and he says, "Hey, I hear you were a pilot in Vietnam." I said, "Yeah, I was." And I was down there holding the camera for Bob Jacobs was his name. He was a professional photographer and he was doing an event down there for Bradley. And they were on the riverboat. So I'm just carrying these cameras. I like to do it just for a hobby. And so Bob and I were good friends. And so anyway, he's talking to me and he says, "Well, where were you at in Vietnam?" And I told him Phu Vietnam. He says, "So was I." And I said, "Really?" And it kind of got my interest in. I said, "What year?" And he said, 69. I said, "Well, that was the year I was there." And so we chit-chat back and forth. And he said, "Well, who'd you fly for?" And I said, "Well, 11 GS. I said, "I was a G2, G3 pilot." And he says, "I rode that bird all the time." He said, "I'm constantly ferrying people back or in charge of people coming out of Saigon or Bien Hoa or Long Binh." And he said, "Yeah, I rode your helicopter." And then we got to talking about going sideways through the palm trees and he started to cry. And he got down on his knees and bawling. And I got down on my knees with him and we were hugging each other because I knew he must have been the guy behind me.
You ran into one of the people that you
was on my helicopter.
It was on your helicopter
Yeah.
years later, and he, obviously that was...
It's not a war story. It actually, I have witnessed that, and he didn't know what was going on because he was riding backwards. He was right behind me, and so he was facing the rear of the helicopter, and he didn't see the palm trees coming up. All he saw was the whole ship turning sideways and then shaking, and he didn't know what happened until...
But it obviously scared him, and he was grateful to you.
He's still not right. Yeah. He's a good friend of mine. He buys me a box of dots, a big box of dots. That's the guy with the dots. For every year we've known each other, this was 54 boxes of dots he gave me for Christmas. Wow. Have you ever eaten 54 boxes of dots?
No.
I can't give them away.
But I enjoyed the ones that you gave me.
It takes him, it takes him all year to collect, and this will be 55 next year, if he's alive, and I am.
What would be your best memory from your military life? If you had to choose one best memory.
Oh, gosh, there were so many events over there.
This would be one of your best memories.
Landing on top of Nui Ba Din and Nui Ba Ra were one of my most favorable moments that I enjoyed. I flew into Cambodia a couple times. I flew out over the South China Sea, but lost one night. But I mean, I did it several runs. Well, when I picked up that helicopter, I flew the Gulf or the South China Sea all the way up to Da Nang. It's just beautiful.
So all of your best memories were in the helicopter?
Oh, yeah, every one of them. I didn't have any other memories over there that I cherished except flying. Yeah.
What would be, if you had to choose a worst memory, of the most difficult memory from Vietnam?
The worst one? That's easy. I was going to the bathroom in a 3-holder. Officers had 3 holes, and the enlisted guys had like 8 or 10 holes. And I'm a very private person when I go to the bathroom. So I'm out there about 10 o'clock in the morning one day, and I'm going to the bathroom all by myself. I'm sitting in the middle hole, and I felt a draft. And I looked down between my legs, and here's this woman down there. They had what you left in the bathroom dropped down into a 55-gallon, they cut them in half in a 55-gallon barrel. And so then they would open the back end of the bathroom up, and they'd pull that 55-gallon barrel, and they pour gasoline on it. Now they're having a big kick, and the guy's got cancer from smelling this burning, but they burned the
manure.
Poop.
Yep.
They burned it, and it would just billow in flames, and of course you couldn't help but smell it. But anyway, she's down there, and she's looking up through the hole, and she reaches up and grabs me and goes boop, boop, and laughs and pulls the barrel out. Well, that was my most
difficult moment.
Difficult moment.
Difficult memory. That's great.
No, it wasn't.
I'm glad it's the worst thing that you were left with after Vietnam. Do you remember, what are your memories of learning that your time in Vietnam was over and you were able to go home?
What my memories were?
What do you remember about learning that your time in Vietnam was coming to an end?
Oh, we counted the days. Yeah, everybody did.
Did you have an exact end date, so you knew when that would be?
They called it DROS. You had a DROS date, and that was, they would pull you off of flight status. And I think I flew the last day of my flight status.
Was it difficult to say goodbye to Vietnam? I know that it was difficult to be away from home and Connie, but...
I just didn't like the smell over there. It smelled like dead fish, and it was humid. It was the most disgusting smell. I got used to it, but I just didn't like the smell of it. I thought I never, ever wanted to go back to that country again. I wouldn't mind, I wanted to fly, but I didn't want to go back to Vietnam. Now, I kind of am toying with going back. we met a pilot that is building a home over there. He's building about $1.5 million home on the north side of Saigon, and I'd kind of like to see that. I'd kind of like to just see the country.
I hope that you do.
It was beautiful. It was a beautiful country if you were 2,000 feet in the air.
Above every. What if you're on land?
What?
When you go back, you'll be on land, right?
Well, I don't think we can get a helicopter. I don't, and I'm not certified to fly right now. I've still got my license, but I don't want to fly over there now. I don't even like flying, in airports here now because it's just too complicated.
Do you fly anymore?
Yeah, I got a little 2-seater,
Okay.
and Connie and I go out on date nights or date days, and we fly around, just wave at people.
How long have you and Connie been married now?
How many years?
57.
57 years. Did you have a recent anniversary?
Well, it's in September.
Okay. Can you describe your reunion with your family when you came home?
Well, we stayed, she probably does a better job at telling us, but we stayed in a hotel, and you brought Alan.
In Peoria.
When I got to meet my son, and that was fun.
I'd love to hear what that was like, preparing to go see Lee for the first time with Alan.
Yeah, we had decided that we would just get together from him getting off of the plane in Peoria and go to a hotel so he could meet Alan. Alan was 8.5 months old before I saw him, and it worked out really well because if we'd gone home, everybody would have been in, and I think it was easier to make this introduction to Alan.
And he took to me, just didn't have any.
Well, I had Alan kiss his picture every night, and I mean he'd just slobber on it, but he saw him in his uniform, so he was used to that.
So you just showed him pictures every day of his dad, so that he would be familiar with him when he got to meet him.
Right.
And see, it'd been all year except for one time we got to hook up in Hawaii, but she didn't bring Alan with her. We just wanted to, we only had a few days together, so I wanted to wait till I got home so I could be with him rather than be with him and then have him not see me for another.
Did you find it easy to bond with him as soon as you were home?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's just like it didn't happen actually, but I have the memories. It's just she does too. It was just.
Lee, who were the most memorable people during your Vietnam experience?
Well, my roommate was memorable. He actually saved my life. Or he says he didn't, but he did. He pulled me out of bed that night that rocket hit. But the person I had the most fun with knowing was a guy called Bob Rackstraw. And he was our maintenance officer, and he was about a block away from me. I didn't meet him. Raleigh was the one that met him because he was very social in Vietnam, and my roommate. And so he was down there talking to Rackstraw, and Rackstraw was talking about skydiving. He wanted to skydive in Vietnam, and Raleigh said, well, my roommate wants to skydive in Vietnam too. And he's a pilot, and of course Raleigh was too, and Rackstraw was too. But anyway, so Rackstraw come up and talked to me, and we got to visiting, and he says, well, he had two, they called them trackers, that were riggers by trade, and they had two 28-foot parachutes. And he said, let's go down and talk to them. Well, these guys were enlisted guys, and the officers aren't supposed to fraternize with the enlisted guys, but we went down and talked to them, Bob and I did. And I asked them, I said, they had them sitting right there at the end of their bed, and they were all packed and ready to go. And I said, well, have you rigged them? And they said, no. We need to know how to rig them. We're riggers by trade, and so we can alter parachutes. but we need to know if you're willing to fly the helicopter, we'll jump them first, and then, but how do you want them rigged? And I said 72 elliptical. I want them built with 72 elliptical steering. And he goes, I can do that. He said, it won't take me a week to do it. So they got down and got them all sewed up and ready to go so you could steer the parachute. And so second week went by, and I thought, that's strange. So I called Rackstra, and we met down there at their tent, and nobody was at the tent. And so one of the kids had walked from the back of the tent up towards us, an enlisted kid, and he said, can I help you, sir? And I said, yeah. I said, we're here to talk to the trackers about these two parachutes. And he said, they just got killed. And he said, so they were running dogs, and the dogs would sniff out these foxholes, and the dogs went into foxholes and didn't come out, and so the two kids went in after the dogs, and somebody blew a grenade. So that was the end of that routine. So I looked at Rackstra and I said, you going to jump them? And Rackstra says, nope. And he said, why don't you and I'll fly? And I says, nope. So we just decided not to skydive in Vietnam. Come to find out, he did later jump 6 times in Vietnam, but that was after I left. But he and I became friends, drank some beer together, and he'd come up and he would sit on my bed and he'd eat her cookies and cakes and just foundered on them. I mean, he'd eat everything he could eat. And it had kind of shut him off a couple times because he just loved sweets. And we talked about a lot of the things we did when we were younger. Okay, that was in 1969. Now in 1971, Bob Rackstra jumps out of an airplane in Seattle with $200,000 in cash and became one of the most widely known national outlaws that they ever had. He was called D.B. Cooper, and to read the book, he come up with D.B. Cooper because his uncle's name was Cooper, and Dan was Dan Cooper, and he just blurted out D.B. Cooper when they asked him who he was.
Okay.
And so anyway, he had this bomb sitting in the airplane, and they had to go back to Seattle and get $200,000. And then he's on the south end of Seattle. They were going to go to Mexico, I guess. And on the south end of Seattle, he jumped out of the airplane at about 10,000 feet. And which, yeah, I mean, all of it he could have done. I didn't know because I hadn't talked to him at that particular point.
Never to be found again?
No, never found him. Well, they found him, but he was in San Diego, wasn't he? At in a wharf. He was living in a hut. But the FBI chased him for 50 years. And the way I found him was the guy that Bob, what's his last name? Anyway, the author of the book, The Last Great Master Outlaw. He wound up. I contacted him, and I said, how do I get a hold of Bob? And he said, you know Bob? And I said, well, yeah, I know Bob. He's a friend of mine. He says, who are you anyway? And he got upset. And I said, well, I'm Lee White. We hung out together in Vietnam. And he says, you're kidding me. He says, where you been for the last 50 years? And I said, oh, I didn't know any of this was going on. Sorry. And he said, yeah. He said, I got his phone number, his email. So he gave me his phone numbers. I texted him. I emailed him. The next day he calls me. I'm at the dealership, and Alan walked up, knocked on my door, and he said, Dad, he said, D.B. Cooper's on the phone. He said, I'm going to shut your doors. He said, he's on line 3. And so I talked to Bob Rackstra for about an hour and 10 minutes. We hooked up and he wanted us to fly out to see him, and we were going to go out in September, and he died in August, and this was like June or July.
So you didn't get there, you didn't get to see him?
No, but
you got to talk to him?
One of my biggest mistakes in life was not just dropping everything I was doing, and I just had some things going that I wanted to finish before our anniversary, and I wanted to share our anniversary with him, and he knew about our anniversary, and he knew about the first thing out of his mouth was, still married to Connie?
Amen.
And I said, yeah. And he said, Is she still a good cook? That's the way the conversation went. I said, yeah.
He remembered her cooking.
And then we talked about a lot of different stuff. But that, that's a memorable person.
Is there anything more you would say about Raleigh, your roommate?
Raleigh's just been a really, really, really good friend of mine for a lot of years. We have a lot of camaraderie. He comes up once or twice a year, and we go down there. We've been down there a couple of times, but he comes up here most of the time, and we just hang out and talk about the old days. And he lives in Bangkok, Thailand, isn't that where he lives? Yeah. In the wintertime, and then comes back to Springfield. And he wound up making helicopters a career. He flew governors and a lot of political people from Springfield, all different directions, mainly to Chicago, for 20 years anyway.
Are you surprised that you didn't make helicopter flying a career?
No, because I'd had enough being gone. I applied to TWA, I applied to Ozark, and I applied to United, I think it was, and in 1971, yeah. And the only one that responded was the one from Chicago, American Airlines, yeah. And they said they'd hire me, but I would be a year before they could start me on the program. Then it would be, you have to fly with them for a year. So it's like 2 years before I really had a paycheck. And I said, no, I need a paycheck right now. And so I started with, I was working at CAT. CAT had to give me the job, but we were in a recession then, and they just did a terrible thing to me, and I wasn't happy with them. And so I asked my dad if he would be interested in me. And his response was, we only know how to kill people and fly helicopters. He said, what are you going to do for me? So
when you returned and you got back to Williamsfield, did you take a few weeks to just decompress?
No, I got right into working at CAT right when I got back.
So you immediately went to work at CAT?
Yeah, I went right back to work. I needed a paycheck. I had 2 mouths to take care of, and she was going to college, and I needed to.
At that time, were you going to college at Bradley?
Actually, it wasn't right then. I actually started a preschool, and Alan was about 4, and I ran that for 6 years while I went back to school.
Okay. So when Lee returned home, were you what community were you living in at that
Peoria.
time? Peoria. Okay. And then at what point did you move closer to Williamsfield?
Well, it was when you started working for your dad,
yeah.
probably not that long after. He didn't really stay at Caterpillar that long.
Okay.
Yeah, we left the apartment there and then moved just north of town to Larry and Carol Mackey's house, bought that and raised our kids there, and then bought the land and built a house. That's where we live now.
And what was your profession once you started working for your dad? What kind of
it was strange. He didn't
work
know.
life did you
He
have?
didn't know what I could do. He said, you really don't know how to do anything in the car business. I said, you didn't either when you came back from World War II. And he said, well, that's true. But Dad, I don't think ever really thought I was capable of doing anything but fly. And so he said, I don't know what I'm going to have you do. And I said, here's the deal. I need a paycheck. And I said, if I don't work for you, I'm going to work for somebody else, but I'm not working for CAT anymore. They're just terrible. And he said, okay. He said, I'll start you at $100 a week and $20 a car. And he says, you can see what you do. And he said, by the way, I worked there for a month. And he said, by the way, I'm going on vacation. He said, I haven't been any place for 3 years. And he said, I need out of here. And I said, well, you haven't showed me how to do anything. I said, how do you sell cars? And he said, well, he showed me the invoice. And he said, here's the price. You sell it for that price. And I said, okay. I said, how do I do trade-ins? And he goes, well, here's the NADA book. It's a yellow book. And he said, it's got retail, trade-in, and loan value. They just give them trade-in value. I said, okay, I can do that. I said, how do I do the paperwork? And Janet Spencer was working for us. We were in the old bank building uptown at that point, and right across from the fire station. And he said, well, here's the purchase order book. And he said, just fill out the purchase order, write the name of the car and the customer's name and give it to Janet. Janet was sitting there and listening to this conversation. And she said, Lee, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. You sell them and I'll do the paperwork. And I said, okay. So that's the way I started. And he was gone. He was going to be gone for 2 weeks, and then he decided to stay for 3, and he was gone 4 months, or 4 weeks. Gone the whole month. Came back, and he said, where's all the cars? And I said, I sold them all. I said, I don't know how to get new ones. How do you get new ones? He said, you call Sue down to zone office in Peoria and just tell her what you need. So he gave me Sue's number. So I called Sue and told her. She said, I want to meet you. She says, you come down here. I want to meet you. And she'd heard about me by that time, I guess. Anyway, so I ran down and saw her. And then, boy, we started having cars, all kinds of cars and trucks. And so we quit there and sold that building to Tucker and bought his building, and that's where we're at now.
Did you ever receive any formal praise from your dad when he came home and all of the cars were gone?
The comment he made was, where the hell's all the cars? And I said, I sold them. He turned around and walked away.
He had to be impressed. He had to be impressed.
No, he didn't have any money. See, we had all our money at that point. I'd sold all these cars, but I didn't know how to get rid of used ones.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he hadn't told me how to do that. And he says, well, you got a whole bunch of used cars. Yeah, I said, I've been washing cars and trying to get them all cleaned up. And I said, I haven't got any sold yet. And he said, well, you got all your money tied up in the used cars. And I said, yeah, I guess. I just don't know anything about this business. And so he ran down to Charlie's and got some money for cash flow. And then we called the auctions and took the cars over to the auctions and sold them, got our cash back. And it was just, that's the way we started.
Off to the races from there.
Dad was not a teacher.
Did you enjoy this profession?
I loved it. Yeah.
Good.
I loved it as long as I could fly. I continued. I started on the GI Bill, and I was flying 10% on the dollar, so I could rent a really nice wheels-up airplane. And I used to fly around the country and do dealer trades and stuff like that, do auction runs, and just build in time for I wanted to get my commercial instrument stateside. I had my commercial helicopter, but I didn't have commercial fixed. And so I was just putting a lot of hours in flying, and the VA audited my pilot's logbook one time and fired me from the VA program because you're not supposed to. I didn't know that. Nobody told me I couldn't do dealer trades but I was logging it in my flight book that I was on a dealer trade, and I was taking mom and dad to supper and doing stuff like that. Well, you're not supposed to do that, I guess. I don't know.
So
Nobody
they slapped
explained
your
it.
hand for that.
Nobody explained that to me.
Lee, did you have any struggles that you can remember adjusting to life back at home after Vietnam?
I didn't have any trouble, did I?
Flushing the stool.
Flushing the toilet, I guess. I would never flushed in Vietnam for a year. That was an experience to have a flush toilet.
But mentally and emotionally, you adjusted fine. And
I'm still nuts,
okay.
but I mean, it's not a problem.
But you always did see things in such a positive light. Would you
I'm
say
what?
you always saw things in such a positive light?
I was just excited to be able to do something. I was so bored when I was a kid, and now I was being able to fly. I was in a war. I was interested in what was going on. I used to get to fly combat assaults, and it would be like the guy wound up being Bob Rackstraw's pilot. His name was General Shoemaker, and I got to fly with these generals, and they would be up there at about 1,500 feet, and the war would be, it was like watching TV. And I'm sitting there in the helicopter, and this guy's orchestrating the entire event. He's talking to the guys on the ground, he's talking to the Air Force, he's talking to, the guys with the bombs, he's talking to the guys with the Willie Pete's, and he's talking to the guys with the hand grenades down on the ground. He's talking to the infantry. I mean, he's doing the whole thing.
And you have the aerial view.
I'm
Best
sitting
seat
right
in the house.
Yeah, we're sitting right. Yeah, you couldn't. I mean, you couldn't have a better seat.
Yes.
The only thing was the red and green bullets would come up. See, the green were the bad bullets, and the red were our guys. But we get red bullets past our. Why would that happen? So I did key the mic one day and told them to knock it off down there. I said, "You guys are shooting at us," and I said, "I'm up here, so don't do that." And it made Shoemaker mad. I wasn't supposed to do that.
Give an order.
But yeah, Shoemaker was he wound up being a general. He was a colonel when I flew him, or when I flew with him, and he went on up to be a general. And he and Rackstraw flew, and that was back when Nixon was having them cut off ears for body count, and they would call in airstrikes after they would do these combat assaults, and they'd land a helicopter. Shoemaker and Rackstraw would land a helicopter, cut off the right ear, and take them back for body counts. And that was just a given. I mean, it wasn't anything terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, Nixon was the one, President
Ordered
Nixon.
it.
Huh?
He was the one who had ordered it in order to
Yeah,
have
he
the body
said, "I
count.
want confirmed body counts." He's tired of this guessing.
Yeah.
For some reason, they didn't like the guesswork, and so the only way. And then the guys in the field, they would wear necklaces, and they would have the ears on their necklaces, and it was, it was a little strange, but
Yes.
no big deal. But yeah, that was fun watching the combat assaults. And we had one time we almost got hit by one of the jets. That was interesting. But to watch him, what they would do, you see him sometimes on TV, but it's not like I got to watch. I'm sitting right there. And he'd be talking to the grunts on the ground, and he'd tell them to pop smoke where they wanted the bombs to land. And so you'd see like a great a purple smoke start to rise in this one particular style. And he would confirm grape. He would say, "Grape smoke," and they said affirmative. And so then he would call the OV-10s, and they had Willie Pete's, or they called white phosphorus rockets on there. It was a twin engine, twin turbo, twin tail boom, kind of a turboprop. And they would come in and they would hit that purple smoke, and they would call purple smoke. And so you'd see them screaming out of the sky at about 300, 350 miles an hour, and they would hit that, and it would do a white phosphorus. And that white phosphorus was just a beautiful, small mushroom explosion. And then that's where the F-100s and the 101s that come out of, they were way up there, like 10,000 feet. And they come screaming in there at about 500-600 miles an hour. And they come right by the helicopter. And you talk about a heartbeat. Oh my gosh, that was fun. And so they come right by the helicopter and hit precision bomb on that, and then pull out at about 6 Gs, and up they would go straight up out of the sky. Of course, you'd lose them in the clouds. And one of them almost hit us one time. I saw it through they have a bubble up on top of the roof, and I could see the nose of the jet coming, and it looked like he was going to hit us. And so I hit left pedal, right cyclic, and would drop sideways and got out of his way. He went right. He didn't see me, and he went on down. But just close calls like that made it exciting.
I was just thinking while you were telling that story, before you said that you were almost hit by one of the jets, that you all have so much trust in each other's skill.
Well, yeah, you didn't have time to trust. You just reacted. It was very much a reaction. He trusted that the guys on the ground knew what they were doing. They trusted that there is a lot of trust. But the event was mainly reaction. You just don't have time to trust. It's just a reaction. You got people going 500-600 miles an hour in a dive with 1,000-pound bombs on board. It's just.
How did that jet not see your helicopter? You had to move. You had to.
Well,
tilt
see,
out
they
of the
sit
way.
on top of the jet, and he was coming down. He was coming down this way, and he was just too close for comfort. So
You moved.
I moved.
Lee, did you ever experience any friendly fire or enemy fire that was life-threatening?
Oh, yeah. I was flying from Phuc Vinh down to Benoit. I had a load of people on board, and one of them was a major, and he was sitting in front of the transmission facing forward. And we were at 2,000 feet, and I was just flying along, listening to Good Morning Vietnam, that radio show, and I'm just buzzing along, and I'd already called Firebase Mace, was the only active artillery fire base. They were circular in size, and they'd have like 3 or 4 or 5 105, 155 howitzers, and they would fire in all different directions. So I called them. They were the active one at that moment, and I called Firebase Mace and asked them if they were active and firing, and he said, negative, sir. He said, we're not firing, and I says, okay, click, and we shut off. Just about 2 minutes later, this major unbuckles and comes up and grabs my helmet and pulls it off the side, and he said, Mr. White, he said, something just came through the helicopter. And I said, what do you mean, something? And I'm turned around, I'm flying, I'm trying to talk to him, and he's white as a ghost. And I said, what do you mean, something? And he said, I don't know. He said it was like 3 feet long. And he said, about the size of a coffee can. He said, I got no idea what it was, but he said, I'm not sure. We just got shot at. And I said, oh my God, okay, sit down. So he went back, buckled up, and I called Firebase Mace, and I said, Firebase Mace, Jaguar 2-2. I said, are you firing? And he says, firing. Sure, we're firing. I said, what direction are you firing? And you got to remember, he was on my east side. He said, we're firing, or he was on my west side. He says, we're firing due east, sir, 090. And I said, what altitude are you firing? 2,000 feet. And I said, damn it. I said, you just ran a 105 through my helicopter. I said, the major's back here, white as a ghost. And I said, what are you thinking? Click.
No apology.
And it was over. I never pressed charges or did anything. I could have had him court-martialed, but I didn't. Try to be nice.
And you have 9 lives, right?
But that was, it was about 10 inches. He said it was about 10 inches behind my head. I didn't see it. I didn't have any idea what happened.
But to be in that back seat and witness this massive rocket going through a helicopter hole would be a sight to see.
Can you imagine?
No.
I mean, that guy's still telling that story if he's still alive.
Yes.
It was,
Thank you.
Pretty bizarre.
Connie, while Lee was away and you finished up your pregnancy and delivered a baby in his absence, what was that like?
Well, I had support from his family and my mom and dad too. And funny thing, when I went to the hospital, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and had my first pain. And Alan was born at 6. And we took a tape recorder. At that time, there weren't videos really, but we took a tape recorder to so he could hear his first cry. And when I was in the delivery room, I saw this guy behind me who the doctor called Dr. Gordon. And I thought, I don't really know any Dr. Gordon. But he had all the garb on for delivery room. And then I happened to look back and I saw him holding a recording device. And I realized it was my father-in-law.
Gordon White.
He was behind me, but we got a recording, and we got that out and listened to it several years after he was born, which was kind of weird. But I had good support. Lee's mom and his grandma and my mom and Lee's sister. She was 10 when Alan was born, but probably the worst thing I experienced was one night a man came to the door about 10 o'clock, knocked at the door, and I went to the door. He was dressed in a suit, and I thought it was somebody going to tell me that he was gone. And come to find out, he was selling pans. And so, but I remember just going back in my room and really,
Breaking down, I'm
yeah,
sure.
yeah, I was.
And you said this person came late at night?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so no wonder. It was an unusual time of day, too.
Right, right. And I knew some people who had been killed in Vietnam, and their wives were notified. Well, one in particular, she was notified on a Sunday afternoon, and I was really scared of Sunday afternoons, knowing that that would not be the time, but it just, so many things
with
would
you.
hit you that, you were afraid.
When Alan arrived, was it, I know it was obviously an exciting day. Were you emotional at all because Lee couldn't be there, or were you just well prepared for that feeling?
Well, yeah, I knew that he couldn't be there, and I just made the best of it. And I remember we had a friend who was not our age, older, but he was a state trooper, and he was able to come up and see me because they didn't have real good visiting rules back in '69, and so he came up to see me, and not too many people could. So.
And then do you remember how you shared the news with Lee that he was a dad?
Well, yes, actually the hospital called Red Cross, and Red Cross did the relaying of the message. And he was flying when he found out that they told him he was a proud papa of a baby Bravo, so that was a baby boy.
Yeah, you couldn't say that. You had to use the phonetic alphabet.
So that's how they delivered the news?
And I was coming in on left base into runway 27 there at Phuc Vinh, and I had mission stuff on my mind, and the operations officer's kind of like a radar on that mesh, and he'd say, Jaguar 2-2, he said, be advised, this is Jaguar 2. And he said, Romeo Charlie had just come down and told us to tell you that you're the proud papa of a baby Bravo. And as I'm turning on to final approach, I keyed the mic and I said, no shit. And then I hear a tussle in the, you're not supposed to cuss on the, and my major, he was Jaguar 1, and he said, Jaguar 2-2, he said, be advised, this is Jaguar 1. And he said, there'll be no profanity on the air, and I'll buy you all the beer you can drink tonight. And I said, okay. Out. And I went ahead and landed. I was out of fuel. I needed to get some fuel, so I had time to chit-chat.
Did you celebrate that night?
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Major Smith took me down to the officers' club and got me wasted. That was fun.
Who did you think Alan looked like?
That was one of the 2 times we went
Lee, because he had brown eyes. And
Yeah. A Lee face.
pretty baby. Everybody liked him, and I showed pictures of him to everybody in the company, and they all thought he was just a beautiful baby.
And so while he was a baby, you still stayed with the White parents,
right.
and or grandparents, I should say. And did you feel like you had an okay time adjusting to being a mom when he was real little?
Yeah, because I had a lot of support. So I was fortunate in that respect, because there were some wives that were alone.
Yes.
So.
Without the support, but with the babies. Lee, do you have older family members in your family that also served in any war?
Yeah, I did. My granddad was in World War I, and he was in the tail end of it. And he was in submarines when they first had submarines. And then he was, of course, in the Navy. And then my dad was in the Army in World War II, and he was in a European theater, and he drove deuce and a half trucks. He was a corporal and drove all through the European theater and delivering supplies, ammunition, whatever. And had fairly good experiences, both of them did, so the military was positive conversation in our particular family. And those are the only ones really that...
Now your grandson.
Oh, my grandson, yes. Let's don't forget Harrison. I tried to talk each one of them into going into the ROTC program in college, which that's a good deal for kids. And he was the only one that partook of it. And he went all the way through, and I got to salute him at the University of...
It was Rose Holman.
Yeah, Rose Holman. And yeah, I got to salute him and hand him his bars. And he didn't go into aviation. And then he's going down, what is it, 4 months? Down in Arizona. And he has to pay back some time to the military, and so he's got a job, but they have to excuse him because he's on this reserve unit, and he seems to like it. I mean, it's pain, but it's just like the military, they're a pain.
And does it make you very proud that he...
Yes.
I can tell.
Yeah, I'm excited for him, and I'm just proud as punch. Yeah.
Yes.
Gotta...
And you said that your grandpa and your dad had positive experiences, and when you enlisted, did they have any additional talks with you about your enlistment or what your experience might be like?
My dad, you mean? Not really. He just said good luck.
Okay. And then you were off.
He thought it was cool that I was going into aviation. Of course, he knew I was nuts about anything to do with airplanes and helicopters, whatever. Skydiving was. I'd like to go on airborne too, but she didn't want me to stay in the military, so.
It had to be done. There had to be an end of that story.
That ended. Yep. Party was over.
In closing, why did you agree to do this interview?
I don't mind talking about Vietnam. I really enjoy it. Once again, it was an experience. I appreciate you recording something because we don't really have anything in our family recorded, particularly professionally done like this. No, I'm thrilled to death with it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being with us.
Yeah.
And Connie, why did you agree to be part of the interview?
Well, I'm proud of Lee and what he did, and
I'm proud of the way she stuck with me, though. A lot of wives canned their husbands, and it was a high divorce rate over there, but she stuck right by me. I don't know why, but she did.
Well, you do have a unique love story for sure. I think you're just a rare romance. I mean
Gotta
that in
keep
a positive
having fun.
way.
We got a great family, so that we have good support there.
What lessons could we learn from your experience? What lessons could current and future generations learn from your experience or from the Vietnam
Enjoy
War?
what you do is what, it may not be a perfect situation or a perfect world you live in, but enjoy what you do. If you can have a beer at the end of the day, that's okay. Just enjoy it. Have fun. Try and make it fun. Try not to get too wound up about all the negatives. Try and look at the positives.
and have a good faith in God.
Yeah.
And have a good faith in God.
Believe in Jesus. I did, and a lot of times I didn't talk a lot to Jesus. I went right to God because I didn't have time to visit on the way, and so I had pretty direct line to God. Oh boy.
Yeah. So a strong faith, a beer at the end of the day, and let stuff go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just hold hands and have fun.
Yes. I know I speak for our DAR chapter when I say how honored I am to have spent time with you both, to hear your story of service, sacrifice, and resilience after returning from war. I'm able to raise a family in a safe and stable country with freedoms and luxuries that many people around the world only dream of having, all due to your sacrifice and years spent protecting our country. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.